State. I'm a country. Everybody's saying. Myself. Been like that for several years. All right, it's 5:30. I'd like to call this meeting to order. This is the Thursday, November 17th, 2022 meeting of the City of Harbor Springs, Michigan Planning Commission. Welcome everyone who came out tonight. Great job, great to see you. And we'll try to do the people's business expeditiously and get everybody back home again. And Jeff, would you like to call roll?
Sure. Barry Lustgarten. Mark Bidet. Here. Bill Mulder.
Here.
George Pete. Here. Bob Thoma.
Here.
Emily Dubay is absent. Vanessa Warren.
Here.
Rick Tarczynski.
Here.
We have a forum.
Great, thank you, Jeff. And let's see, we did not have Al Dykett tonight. And Al, we got a message from Al that since he's been replaced on the city council, thank you, that he's not representing on the planning commission anymore. And in fact, he may be moving out of Harbor Springs. So I'd like to thank Al for his service here on the Planning Commission and for many, many years and many different roles as well. And the other thing for folks who aren't Planning Commission aficionados, I'd like to introduce who's at the table up here. We have Victor Sinodowski, our city manager, Jeff Grimm, our zoning administrator and assessor, and John Icoangeli, who's our planning consultant from the firm of Beckett and Rader based in Petoskey. And then the rest of us are just regular Joes here. All right. First thing on the agenda would be to take a look at the minutes from our last meeting from October 20th.
I move to approve the minutes of October 20th.
A second. Second from Barry. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All right. Next thing on the agenda is public comment and correspondence. This is the part where members of the public could feel free to address the Planning Commission about something that's not on tonight's agenda. So on tonight's agenda is site plan review for 300 West Lake Street, Harbor Springs Market, and site plan review for 680 Pine Street, public hearing on guest quarters, and a review of the capital improvements plan, and also potentially a zoning code review. So is there anyone who'd like to address the Planning Commission on an issue that's not one of those for 3 minutes, 3 succinct, well thought out minutes? All right, well, thank you. All right, let's move on to new business. First order of business is the site plan review for 300 West Lake Street, Harbor Springs Market. And Jeff or Dan, would you like to tee this up for us?
Sure can. Mr. Chairman, members of the Planning Commission, there's a site plan that's been submitted for the Harbor Springs Market. The proposal is to expand on the east side of the building for a new entry and convert the existing entry into a bottle return, and then to create a small addition that connects the market with the adjacent building behind it. It's pretty straightforward. I really didn't see anything that was significantly objectionable relative to the review criteria. The one thing I will point out is that the applicant does not want to close the curb cut on Lake Street. That curb cut will no longer be used for vehicular traffic going into the property. But they do want to keep the curb cut for deliveries because of the accessibility into the entrance of the building. As noted in the review, the parking lot does not have the number of parking spaces that are required by ordinance. It did not meet that requirement even before this site plan, so the parking has been non-conforming. However, I did note when I was out in the field taking a look at it, that it appears that the employees park on the side yard setback and in the rear yard setback in the grass lawn area. I think there's an opportunity here to kind of clean that situation up as part of the site plan, whereby putting in defined parking, asphalt parking spaces off of both of the side streets in order to provide some additional parking, standard parking for the employees, so the main parking lot can be used for patrons. Other than that, I did not see anything significant with the plan.
And that street parking would be in the city right of way?
In the city right away. I noted when I was there, like I said, I took some photos for the PC based on existing site conditions, and right now they're parking in the rear side setback, and they're parking on the side setback and the grass lawn panels. It's functional, but it's not the best in terms of appearance with the neighborhood because it's just people parking wherever they can park on the lawn. I think it would really kind of clean things up, make it much more definable if if there was some parking, those were defined parking places. I estimated based on measurements that would provide about 11 parking spaces, both in the rear and the side, which would help free up the main parking lot for patrons. I think you're all aware that part of the parking lot is also used for Emmett County recycling. And, that takes up a few parking spaces, but while I was there at the site, there was a number of people that were coming in recycling. So I think it is a value that the neighborhood.
So that's a public service that the.
Yes.
provides.
Yes.
Is it non-conforming because of the lack of 11 spaces?
It's non-conforming, Barry, because of the square footage of the building based on the current code requirements. But you have to, from my perspective, you're not going to be able to make it conforming. It was non-conforming before the addition. The addition's not providing any additional merchandising space. It's just a new entry into the building. But the importance of a business like this is that it provides convenience for the immediate neighborhood for people to walk over to it. So you have to take that into consideration along with the parking, that the building serves more than just a parking lot because it's in the neighborhood and people can walk or ride their bikes there, which some were doing in the morning. So, and that's a function of having a neighborhood grocery store. You don't want to run them out of business because they can't provide a few extra parking spaces.
So they did indicate on their site plan on the north side of the property, which would be the back of that property there.
Clark Street.
Clark Street, that they would add 6 parking spaces. And this also stems from, we met, I think it was earlier this year or at the end of last year, regarding that little addition between the 2 buildings that they did. And we talked about parking at that time and the parking on the grass. And when Fred was putting together the site plan, I had a discussion with him that needed to be addressed. And they did indicate adding parking spaces on the north side along Clark Street. They have been parking on the west side along Harrison, but they have not indicated adding parking spaces there. So maybe that might be a good question when we move to Fred to know whether or not they plan on still parking in the grass area on that side or not.
And that's the area that I measured that they could get another 5. So between the 5 and 6, they could get 11. That's all I have, Mr. Chairman.
Any questions for these guys before we turn it over to Fred? See if you'd like to say anything.
Just one quick question.
I have a question for Jeff. The last time this was brought up, there was some concern about an old alleyway right away that ran alongside the building. Has that been cleared up?
Yes, that's been resolved.
Okay.
So just some little history for everybody. This is in the let me back up. This is in the Layton Park subdivision. And there is an alley that runs down the middle of this. They basically have almost the whole block here. And then the car wash has a lot there as well. The alley was vacated by the city, but I don't believe that it was abandoned by Circuit Court. Circuit Court would normally be the entity that would assign ownership. But for tax purposes, we have been assessing the property as owning it. It has been described in their legal description as owning it. So we've basically used that as an interpretation to say that they have control of the property and they've been paying taxes on it. If it were to go to Circuit Court, it would be given to them. So for all intents and purposes, we have not held that against them for property lines or anything for setback purposes. So there's no zoning issues at present with this. We feel that has been resolved.
Thank you.
Somebody else have a comment?
Oh, my question, I think I know the answer, but the parking was calculated on the entire complex, the entire building, even the new addition that used to be a pest supply is now Lion Place. So it's all the same.
All the same.
Great. All right, should we ask Fred if he'd like to tell us anything more about the request?
No.
Okay. No, we shouldn't ask. Great. All right, should we open this up for public comment? All in favor of doing that, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? All right, would anyone like to make a comment on this application? Yes, sir.
My name is Bernie Hines. I live on Harrison Street. I walk by the IGA every day. I talk to Scott. I mean, I know a lot of people there and they have talked about putting that, and I know Harrison, where they park, like closer to the lake, if they could put that into parking too, that's like 4 more parking spots. And then if they pave it, it would really clean up that area quite a bit. I know that's what they're trying to do. And that would be one of the things that I'd like to see done, because it is always muddy and mucky in that area.
Okay. Any other comments? But do you have any more information on the owner's ideas regarding parking or?
I think he's expressed a willingness to pave the muddy spots that are being described.
On Harrison? Is that right?
No, on Clark,
On Clark,
What about Harrison?
both.
both.
Okay,
Oh,
Okay.
Right,
that would make a big improvement.
that sure would.
Can you be more specific?
No, it's just, it's illustrated, it's not on Harrison, but I think the photographs picked it up.
We did, the photograph did pick it up, and I did a quick measurement, and I think you can get another 5, maybe 6, but right. Yeah. Yeah, there they are.
Question about the Clark Street side. I know that there are a couple of houses on the north side of that street that look into or have side yards that look at the recycling and the parking lot. And currently there are some trees and there is a little bit of a buffer there. Is that going to continue to exist if parking spaces are put in there and it's paved?
The recycling area is buffered by a fence.
Yep.
That goes along Clark and then goes along the traverses the other street, I believe. So it's an L-shaped fence that screens the recycling. There were some trees or large shrubs along Clark in a previous aerial photograph, but those have all been removed and they're parking in there now.
Yeah, okay, those are all right.
Yeah. But I think if the owner is willing to put in parking on Clark, which he's showing on the site plan, and also cleaning up the Harrison side of the street, I think that'll resolve a lot of the appearance issues that are impacted, with the surrounding neighborhoods, like this gentleman is saying. It'll just clean it up.
Yeah, but my mom lives on the corner of Traverse and Clark, and my mom picks up garbage from the recycling area in the summer when the winds are coming out of the south every day. So it's not keeping the plastic bags in. It's all coming out and going right into her yard. So I think it's going to be really important to keep some green space there.
Under a fence or trees.
We were not touching it.
They're not removing any of the green space near the recycling containers.
Okay.
Correct.
That's remaining.
That's all.
And that's something we might want to talk to the county about
Yeah.
as well.
Yeah, it's such a great resource having
Yeah.
those recycle bins. I know some businesses moved them because it was such a nuisance and.
Maybe they need their fence to go down to the ground or in the wire, barrier.
Yeah, and I know that the county has expressed that they are not happy with this location because people are dumping garbage and stuff. I don't know how much longer it's gonna stay here, but
All right, any more public comment or? Great, let's, all in favor of closing the public comment, please say aye.
I,
Aye. All right, commissioners. John and Jeff, what are our options here?
Your option is, I think, based on what we've heard from the project architect and the discussion in the planning commission, would be to make a motion that the site plan meets the review criteria that is specified in section 50-2001 review criteria, and that the planning commission would recommend that parking be installed in addition to the site plan also on Harrison Street. in terms of a surface parking lot.
I'll make that motion.
Any, or a second to that motion?
Second.
Any more discussion on that?
Yeah. What can be done between the city and the county about the recycle? That's a clear resource for up there, for the city to have the county say this is too much trouble, we're taking this stuff out of here. It is not a good thing. Is there any way we can get some cooperation between all the parties about the trash and the overflow
Something for.
That's something I can reach out to the county.
Yeah.
Just talk about it.
It would be a shame to not have that there, to have to drive out to the facility or, I mean, it isn't as important in a small town as the grocery store, but it's right there.
John, I have just a thought is that if we're going to be approving them to put parking spaces along Clark Street and Harrison Street, those are in our right of way.
Correct.
So I think
You're gonna
that
need
probably
city council.
would need to go to city council, yeah.
All right, well, here at the planning commission, we have a motion on the table to approve the site plan with the addition of parking spaces on Harrison. And we have a second for that. You want to call a vote, Jen?
Absolutely.
Can I just also clarify, just that if city council for some reason doesn't approve it, this approval will still hold? Just because there's a chance that city council may say we don't want, or I don't know, they may not say that, but. I just
So to
wanted-
clarify, we're approving potentially
Yeah.
what we in the planning commission can approve.
Yeah.
City council could do something different regarding the use of city property in the right of way for parking. All right,
I have one more question. I don't see, and if we're asking to add more paved surfaces, I don't see any provisions in here of like how we deal with increased runoff and stormwater. 6 parking spaces, how big is a parking space? 8 by 12 at least. So 8
Yeah.
times 12 times
10 by
8
20.
is a lot of surface area of a hard surface at the top of the hill, and we just had our main road washout, which is just below that grocery store. So
Since this is gonna be going on city property, that's something I probably would review with our DPW and Jeff. Steve is technically.
You can certainly, we can certainly have a discussion with the property owners. We have language in the zoning code that says that I can ask for basically a drainage plan. And if you, basically, I think what you could do is approve this conditionally that they provide us with a drainage plan that we would have benchmark review and make sure that it's sufficient to handle any change in surface runoff caused by any added parking spaces.
I think if you take a look at the photo in the site plan review, you'll notice that the setbacks in the back of the building and on the side of the building are very deep. And the parking lot design off of the street could actually slope the grade into the greenbelt area to act as a part of the stormwater mitigation. You have like, and you can see the photograph, how much green space, and they're driving all the way up to the building. So if the parking spaces were off of the street, you're gonna end up with a pretty sizable green belt between the parking lot and the building, and you could slope the parking back towards the building. You'd have enough green space, I think, to manage or at least assist with some of that stormwater. But, the DPW can take a look at it.
We tend not to drain.
I'll
towards buildings.
I know.
I'll amend the motion, read through the motion that our grading plan be provided for review by engineering.
Okay. The second, do you still agree
Yes.
with the amended motion?
Yeah.
All right, ready for roll call? Rick Turchinski,
looks like yes.
Vanessa Warren,
Yes,
Bob Thomer,
Yes.
George Pete,
yes,
Bill Mulder,
Yes.
Mark Bidet,
Yes.
Barry Lustgarten.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, next thing on the agenda is another site plan review. This one for 680 Pine Street. Barbara Lapham. All right, Jeff and John.
So
John's gonna have.
I'm gonna give you a little bit of background on this. Barbara has also been to the zoning board of appeals. And could you go to the next slide that shows the variance? The next one. Perfect, thank you. So the zoning board of appeals reviewed this as well. This is a very shallow property where normal lots are 130 to 140 feet deep. This property is only approximately 100 feet deep. Also on the back of the property is the restricted bluff zone. And with those complications, Dan prepared this information, which was provided to the zoning board of appeals at their November 9th meeting. And they were granted a variance, which covers the area in the green at the street and the area in the green here at the back of the property. The main issue were normally residential site plans come to me for administrative approval. Because this property has portions of the project that go into that restricted bluff zone, it requires planning commission approval, along with a letter from an engineer. I believe the understanding or the gist of this is to go through this process to make sure that the work that they're doing isn't going to create any instability with the bluff itself. We put this these things into process about 2002, where there were some issues outside of town with people building within too close of proximity to a steep slope, and it caused some issues. So that's really why it's here for site plan review of the planning commission as opposed to coming to me, because of that extra issue. There is a letter that's included that provides some feedback from Benchmark Engineering regarding the work. We then had Beckett and Rader review that, and they've provided a review as well, saying that they concur that that seems to be appropriate to address the situation. But I'll also let Dan Gorman explain what they want to do, how they want to do it to make sure that it works. Any other questions about the site plan and what they proposed with that?
Just to catch up, the macro story here is that there's an existing residence that's being replaced by a new structure.
Yes, I should have said that. So the pink area here is the existing chalet house that's on the property now. We've been talking with the owner and another property owner about the interest of moving that off of the site to a new location. And there is a new home being proposed for that site.
Any questions for Jeff before we go to Dan?
So when the chalet home was built, that buffer had not existed.
Correct. That home, I think, it's been there for quite a while. I couldn't say exactly how long. But we adopted the regulations regarding the topography and slope of the bluff and that restricted bluff zone, I believe approximately 2002. George?
Why did the zoning board of appeals feel that it was appropriate to build this or to allow this house to go beyond all of these setbacks and to be built to the far margins of the envelope?
They found that the property owner had a practical difficulty. That's what things usually come back to with the zoning board of appeals is when someone's asking for a variance, they have to prove a practical difficulty. Bob and John are here. They serve on the zoning board, so they can answer questions about that as well. But essentially, I believe it was due to the shallowness of the lot. It really constricted the buildable envelope as far as front and back. If this lot had been 130 or 140 feet deep, they would have had another 40 feet to work with, and they may not have needed the variance.
Yeah, and to go off that, one of the factors that the ZBA looks at is, can they enjoy their property in the same or similar manner as nearby properties can enjoy their property and so by this lot being much smaller than other nearby lots, they don't have the same flexibility to build a similar type of house as neighboring properties. Also, there's, I think there's some discussion how the topography there with the bluff being there, that also impacts what they and how they can build a house there. I think also the ZBA had some discussion about that they're actually reducing the amount of house that's hanging over the, or that is on in that buffer zone compared to the previous house. So all those factors kind of added up in their decision making.
Okay, Dan?
Rick had a
Oh,
question.
sorry. But the bluff was there when they bought the property. And the shallow lot was there. So why should they be building beyond what's allowed?
They're not asking to build what is beyond what they're allowed, right? So we have.
They're going into a restricted area.
Yes, but the zoning code specifically states that they can build within that restricted area, right? This lower line here, where on the southern edge of this shaded gray area, that area is where the topography of the bluff is too steep and we say you can't build on that area at all, right? The area above here, north of that shaded area, that's your buildable area. You don't need any special permissions to build in that area at all. The shaded area is area that's within close enough distance to the slope of the bluff where we say you can build here, right? You have the ability to build there, but we want to make sure that the work that you're doing is not going to cause any instability with the bluff. So we asked the property owner to go through another hurdle or two before we approve, to make sure that the work that they're going to be doing is safe. And that's where Dan Gorman has put together his site plan, indicating how he wants to do things and why. He's had Benchmark Engineering do an engineering review, basically to, in their opinion, give us their opinion of whether that's correct, that it will, keep the stability of the bluff. And that's what we need, or you as the board need, in order to approve the site plan, is you need to be convinced that the work that they're doing, that's shown in their site plan and by their engineer's report, is going to be safe for, that it won't negatively impact the bluff, right?
Well, one of my concerns is that building on the bluff is a very fragile area. And we're basically putting more than twice the amount of weight on that bluff as was there before. Do we have any proof that this isn't going to affect the stability of that bluff?
I don't know that I can agree or disagree. I don't have enough information about the weight of structures, but yeah, if we looked on there, the pink area was the home that was there before.
Yeah.
And that was going farther into the restricted bluff zone than what their current proposal is. So the spatial area that they're going into the bluff is shrinking. Now, they are going up a second floor in the front. Dan, is it 1 story or 2 story in the back? And
Well, if you go back to the site plan, it's a 2-story home.
Yeah.
And the second story holds itself back towards the setbacks, right? It's,
Does the existing structure have a basement?
yes,
And this proposed has a basement?
that is correct.
So what we have to work off of on that is the engineer's assessment that the proposed home will not negatively impact the stability of probably damaged bluff or adjacent properties. What the planning commission, as Jeff kind of alluded to there, and also John Michelangelo had a review, but what your role here is do you find that assessment by Benchmark and staff and consultant here is sufficient, or do you think you need more of an assessment? So I think that's really, and if you find it is sufficient, then you shall approve. If you don't find it sufficient, you can ask the applicant to provide more information, or do more studies, I'm assuming, so.
Is the existing foundation and basement being removed?
That's correct. Yeah, and you'll notice on the southeast corner too, southwest corner, we have a covered porch area, and that covered porch is being supported by one pilaster. So what we're projecting not most, but in that corner, that's being, as you see, of the green circle in the lower right corner, there's just a footing there. We're not unearthing anything there, but we are again removing the existing. Our proposal is to pull it off of the restricted zone more than what currently is.
But really, the biggest work item that you're gonna do is that one post in the
Yep.
restricted area.
What's the square footage of this?
31.
3,000?
Rick had a question.
One more concern, when it was a chalet, we had a fairly steep pitch. But we're increasing the roof size tremendously, and what's that runoff going to do to the stability of the bluff? I don't see any gutters on any of the drawings that might redirect it, so those are some pretty steep pitches. That water is gonna come off at a pretty good clip. My concern is that it could wash out that back area.
We would have a water management system for the roof, be it gutters or a drip line. That would be, drained down into a collection system.
Okay, because I didn't. I thought-
No, it's not on plan, but we have two options to do that, or gutters. Try to avoid gutters sometimes, since they're not very conducive to this area sometimes. So one of the two ways that will be, that drain off will be managed.
And we do have a provision in the zoning code that if water from a property is affecting neighboring properties, it could be a zoning code violation.
Right.
So, and I think most just engineers and architects and designers know that. But it's a good question.
Looking at Benchmark's memo, they seem quite confident that this is not gonna damage the bluff. You know, with the single 16-inch diameter poured concrete pier. They seem to feel that this is fine and it's gonna be safe in that area. Then we have a second opinion provided by Beckett and Rader, and they seem to agree the same. So I guess the question,
What's the current square footage of the house now?
Of the chalet?
Yeah.
Probably 1,000.
13.
and again, with the zoning board of appeals approval, they've already gotten the owner's already gotten the okay to build this size, the shape in this location.
Right.
Realistically, what we're doing in this regard is we have, I think, two roles. One is, are they complying with the zoning code? And other than the variant, other than building outside of their setback, which they did receive a variance for, I believe that they are. You know, or that's the first criteria is, are they complying with the zoning code? The second would be the stability of the bluff issue and going through making sure they're taking the necessary precautions there, and whether you feel that that's appropriate or acceptable or not.
What's the plan with the existing vegetation on the bluff, where this, concrete pylon is gonna be put down, and there's gonna be some excavating presumably?
Well, there's a large tree on the site that's coming down. It's on our property. But I've spoken with Jeff, that's probably a blessing because now we can get in better grass situations. Trees are great, but they kind of shade out any type of growth. So we'll be able to grass out that whole area, get the good stability for it.
Does anyone else have any questions? Is anyone ready to?
I was concerned about the size at CBA, and I'm still concerned about a 3,000 square foot house for an individual, but that's not why we're here. Seems excessive.
I think that's right.
Unfortunately, I think that ZBA made an error in allowing that to happen personally, in that area especially.
Yeah, it's way too large for the neighborhood. So many of the neighbors have written letters against it.
That baby's born though, seems like.
Well, we'd like to get some public input on this point.
I think so. I mean, removing a large tree from the bluff, we don't really have too many left. The ones we do have are on the east bluff. That's kind of the jewel of the town at the moment. It's a really small structure that's currently there. We're looking at tripling the size. That's a lot. That's already a pretty small corner. So I think some public input would do us all a little bit.
Okay. All in favor of getting some public comment right now? Please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Anyone like to make any comments from the audience?
Yeah, one question. I go by there every day. I don't have a problem with the house, but the thing that I was wondering is some builders will totally go outside the parameters when they build. And I've worked in construction for 40 years. So my question is, it's pretty important that we're on top of that when they go ahead with it.
As far as like the site preparation and the excavating, you mean,
Right.
or?
Because they can go, I mean, I had that happen, they went on my property for excavating, and you just gotta make sure that, you know, they keep within the limits so they don't disturb the bluff.
Thank you. Any other comments from the audience? All right, all in favor of closing public comment, please say aye. All opposed? All right, so I get back to us. Why don't we go around? Barry, do you have any other comments or?
I mean, I agree with George. I mean, basically, you know, the zoning board of appeals kind of pigeonholed us into, I guess, agreeing to this. I mean, to go from 1,000 to over 3,100 square feet is definitely. Yeah, it's definitely, you know, footprint is just going right outside.
Excuse me,
Pardon,
excuse me.
yeah, we couldn't hear up here.
But yeah, I mean, it just for that location, it just seems unfortunate, but.
Okay. You have any other thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, planting grass is great, but on an unstable slope, I mean, grass roots only go down in this climate, in this zone, 5 inches max, mostly 3. So, you know, it's not the same as the roots of a mature tree stabilizing an entire large area. And it's become a real issue where I live on West 4th Street with, you know, all of our backyards collapsing. And I'm not seeking ZBA approval to do anything crazy because I knowingly bought a house and a lot that is in an unstable area. So I don't know. That's where I'm at.
Rick, any other thoughts?
I have concerns also about taking down the older building and the equipment that's gonna be on that bluff to pull up the basement, and I think it's hard for me to believe they're not gonna disturb that bluff area. But I've already voiced my concerns about runoff and everything I've read about bluff building. You should stay 20 feet back from the bluff before building anything. And it's just too large a property. I mean, a building for that property, it shouldn't have been approved. And I would like to see some kind of proof that they will remedy any damages done by that bluff washing out. Because that does go into our spillway. I don't know if FEMA would have to have some kind of okay on this or not. But it could get into that whole area. And then I would hate the city to have to pick up its tab for that. So I would like some kind of guarantee.
Yeah. Let's explore that for a minute. Isn't there a process with the county where I have a recollection that we went through this with something else that was close to the bluff, and construction firm needed to get the county's okay for. Am I imagining this?
Wasn't that just across the street? That development across the street? From this,
Matt's, yeah, the six house.
yeah,
And
there were 2 homes in that development that were gonna be in that bluff area.
okay, you guys aren't remembering.
No, I guess I'm not.
Remember the
That
count
was one a couple months ago.
Something that we took action on here?
Yeah.
but it was several months ago, the.
And we asked them to come back, and one
4
of
or
the things
5
we asked them
over
to do was to consult the county.
In between Lake and Pine.
Correct.
Yeah.
That's all.
And they haven't come back with anything.
No.
And they've sold one of the pieces of property that was going to be their access drive into that piece. So I don't think that we'll,
Okay, but the main point, I thought there was a parallel between, doing some building close to the bluff or in the gray zone there that we had learned about, that there was some coordination with the county.
so we approved that, well, I take that back. He was applying for a condominium lot split, creating 5 or 6 units.
Yes.
And that's a 2-phase process. The first phase is that he comes in with his tentative plan, with a site plan showing the approximate or showing the sizes of the lots and whatnot. And we gave him tentative site plan approval to move on to the second phase, which was to generate the master deed plans for the full project. We did do that conditionally, that we had requested him to look at some potential revisions to the size and shapes of the lots. Specifically the buildable areas to
And
try
getting
and
rid of
stay
the
farther
cul-de-sac.
away. But that was more specifically because they were really close, bordering into the floodplain. Right? That was an issue.
And
with
we
the
thought if they
floodplain.
got
Remember
rid
this,
of the
John?
cul-de-sac, I don't think God
John
was
was
even
on-
here yet.
Yeah,
We talked about doing a T
he could have maybe
drive
gotten
to
more
get
room
that, to get
yeah.
them further away
So
from
the
the bluff.
difference here is that they're talking about the flood area, this is not a flood.
Right.
That was
area.
specifically floodplain
Right.
issues that were going on there.
So they're gonna need to get a building permit. Right.
Yeah.
Let me,
Go, Mark.
let me address that. Normally I don't bring this up, Michigan building code issues, but given the sensitivity of the site and what's being discussed on the board here, there is in the Michigan Residential Code, section starting at R 403.1.7 all the way through 403.1.7.4. They have specific requirement setbacks. And I guess if that's something that were addressed directly, that I think would perhaps ease some people's mind about how this bluff could be be stabilized. It's very specific. I don't know if you've done that already or not.
No.
But there's a very nice diagram. I'll just show this around for you guys to see how this is supposed to work. Where there's a diagram here, this. So this is maybe something that would help alleviate some of the concerns, so we could ask for additional information in this regard. Because that's something that perhaps, I don't know, I didn't see that reference specifically in Performance's letter, that this was addressed. I know this has been, I've had to deal with this going up out of town and all that kind of stuff over the years, but right here in town, that's used to be able to build, fairly close. But now they've defined it. I think they did this in 2012, that this became part of the building code. We're still in the 15 right now. It's been around for a while.
So if that's part of the building code. Obviously, like anything else, we're building that envelopes itself underneath the building code. We need to meet those, which we will.
Yeah, well, you may not be able to, given where the location of the top of the bluff is to the bottom of your footing. There's a mathematical requirement formula you have to meet. And I can't tell from this if you do or not with your 36-inch pier. I don't know, I can't tell you, I don't see it. But normally, just given the sensitivity of it, it's the only reason I don't bring this up right now, to be candid with you.
But
Okay.
side question for me then, is that something that the building department would approve or not approve?
Yeah, well, it has to be, yeah, if it's not correct, they don't allow it.
All right,
You know, so that's a big issue you'd run into later on if for some reason that got missed. But yeah, no, it's required, it's a requirement. It's a statute.
and that would be addressed through their building permits that they pull.
Correct.
Okay,
Now, given its location and all that stuff, and there's a site plan, shows contour lines. You can measure the distance, you can apply the formula and say if it meets it or not.
So then, because we know that if the owner goes ahead and builds this thing, they're gonna have to comply with the building code and has these safeguards in there. From the point of view of the planning, city planning commission. You know, I guess the question is, can we feel like those concerns are addressed by the building codes and that the county will pick that up and make sure that it's done right or it's not done? And from what I'm seeing on this diagram, it looks like this has been considered. And I feel like with the letter from Benchmark and the concurrence from John's firm and the small amount of construction that actually goes on in the gray area with the backup and safeguards from the county, I feel like I could support this.
small side note. Part of our requirements is a site plan and a cross section. And there is on this page of the, I don't remember what the page number is, that was part of the packet, where that has Benchmark seal. Primarily, they have the site plan, but on the side here, they do have two cross sections of the property, which I think is what you're, I don't know if it's as expansive of an area as what was shown there. But there is cross sections as part of their site plan that was submitted. And we do require that.
And I would offer, and if the applicant's open to this, is perhaps meeting with our arborist to see if there's, you know, certain vegetation that the city would recommend or our arborist would recommend that is better for bluff stabilization, because I'm not the expert, you know, I'm not saying you guys aren't, but maybe the arborist will know, hey, grass, plants, trees or something will work, if you're open to that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I agree with Mitch on that. I don't think Benchmark's taking in consideration the removal of the tree and things like that on the environmental side of things. I definitely agree.
Yeah, I'm worried they're not taking into effect the account of removing the existing basement. And having that huge hole, that gap there then. How is that gonna be restored?
Well, the applicant doesn't need our approval to remove the basement, I guess. Or remove the house or whatever, so.
Out the bluff.
Vanessa, would you like to make any other comments?
No, I mean, we're just about the bluff, right? I mean, we can't.
Mark, do you feel like those safeguards from the,
Well, it's
Building code.
what's the building code? You have to meet it. And, you know, the section, you know, they are there, but it's not, it wouldn't quite be the angle I would want to see it at, where it shows the actually how close you are. It should be perpendicular to the slope of the grade. You know, to really show that would relate to directly to the building code.
Based on
But
this.
the building
yeah,
code
yeah.
is, you know, it's, you know, Dan's gonna need it. He has to.
So based on that feedback, I would maybe suggest offering two conditions if they're open to it. One was meeting with the arborist to create a vegetation plan, and second is maybe submitting to the zoning administrator a plan showing how they meet the building code requirement.
Well, actually, if you would, if I may, if it's following up on that, if you would provide, you know, have Marty Van Berlo take a look at it, you know, do the section perpendicular, show it to Marty and have Marty say, yeah, that meets it. Because
Obviously, we have a structural engineer who will be very involved in this also, so it's just not somebody throwing a pile of a piece of concrete and come today. So there's much more.
well, this hasn't been engineered yet.
What hasn't been,
Because
my footage, no.
okay, I was wondering about 36-inch sonotube being there. That's a lot of weight. That's a lot of concrete. It eats up a lot of your bearing capacity. So you might not have that there.
It may not be that heavy.
It's probably going to be a much smaller pier sitting on a pad footing, right?
I wouldn't bet that, it would be heavy right now.
All right. Well, do we feel like we're in a position to make a motion and decide on this?
I have a question. Is this a year-round residence?
Yes.
The ZBA approved this because we work on a very, very specific, small footprint. And as long as the petitioners fit in that footprint, we're obligated by law to approve it. There's no room for opinions, regrettably, or I suspect this might not have passed.
If I had an opinion to this, it's positive, and what you guys don't know, I don't know how, I've been on the property, I've been in the house. I know the house, I know the property.
Me too.
That's almost flat land where they're talking right there. Very slight slope before you get to the drop off. So where the pylons are still on the flat land almost. So you got to think about that too. Okay, it's not in the slope.
Victor, what were your two conditions again that you were suggesting?
One was to work with the city's arborist just to create a vegetation plan for the area, the bluff there, and that's in the zone. And then the second was to provide some sort of evidence or demonstration that they will meet the building code requirements as cited by Mark for the setback.
Yeah, the setback from the top.
Setback from the top, yeah.
It's a setback requirement.
And they would provide that to the zoning
Yeah.
administrator.
Yeah.
Okay.
And we'll get approval from that county to submit to you guys.
Can I just say something, Jim?
Oh.
I talked to Jeff today and I told him that I was very anxious to talk to your arborist.
Okay.
And that we would work, our landscape person would work with your arborist to make sure that we do nothing to disturb the bluff. In fact, whatever we plant there will be specifically for strengthening the bluff.
That's our goal.
That is
That's
our
our goal.
And I've said that last week and I said it again today.
Thank you. All right, well, in light of our narrow scope on this thing and on the assurances from Benchmark and Beckett and Rader and the two conditions that Victor mentioned, which was meeting with the arborist and trying to optimize the vegetation, as well as providing any additional detail to give us confidence about the meeting of the Michigan building code, then I'd make a motion to approve this request.
I'll second.
All right. We have a motion.
Including any further public input or no?
We had it.
Got it.
All right, there's a motion on the table in a second. Any further discussion or questions before we move to a vote?
Roll call vote?
Yep.
Mark Bidet.
Yes.
Barry Lustgarten.
Yes.
Rick Tarczynski.
No,
Vanessa Warren.
Yes.
Bob Thoma.
No.
George Pete.
No.
Bill Mulder.
Yes.
That's 4-3. And it requires 5 votes to pass. So that motion fails.
No, based on what? You're going to an avenue we've improved from zoning board of appeals and bringing a personal opinion that the house is too big. I guess I'm kind of confused on that transition.
Yeah, so that's a good point. We would need to provide a reason for why it's denied, because then the applicant has an ability to appeal this to the ZBA. And so it'll need to be appealed based on a reason.
Great. So folks voted no.
Victor, I'm gonna screw things up here. I'm gonna recuse myself from this. I'm sorry. I should have done this earlier. Being on the ZBA.
I forgot about that.
This is
Yes.
too-
So,
Yeah, I'm gonna get out of it.
and actually, I should back up and I should have stated this at the beginning. Because Bob serves on the ZBA and the planning commission, he's not supposed to participate in a vote after it's already been handled by the other board. I'm sorry, so I should not have called your
I
name,
didn't know that.
Bob,
but I'm gonna
and
do
I
that.
shouldn't have,
Yeah.
So now the vote's 4-2.
well, it's still 4-2 and it still requires 5 votes to pass.
I voted yes.
Correct. But Rick Tarczynski and George Pete voted no, so it's 1, 2, 3, 4 votes for and 2 votes against.
Yes.
But we need 5.
Okay. So the applicant has asked for the reasons why. They voted no.
I don't consider any engineers up there. You're basing these things on weights and erosion, and Mark's absolutely correct. There are measures that we always need at the county levels to make certain we are, parallel in our Southwood County rules and regulations for safety. And you come to the table with a couple things that I don't know what you're basing it on. I mean, it's not like you have engineered reports that said, yeah, this could be a problem. So I don't see how you guys are coming up with the answer other than a personal feeling, or maybe it's gonna do this, or maybe it's gonna do that. I don't know how to address or even how you can even explain something like that.
So Rick, why don't you start out for us and tell the applicant the reason
Well,
for your
I
no
think it's
vote
a
so
very
we can-
sensitive area. You're building on a bluff. You're building closer than what's recommended to build to the edge of the bluff. And I think there's a great danger of runoff from your building, whether you have gutters or not. That's still a lot of roof at a very steep.
You think though, I
And
don't mean to
I
be
just let them
rude.
give their
All right.
opinion. They already made their vote, so let's get their reasoning.
So I heard sensitive area. And
Runoff.
roof runoff, okay?
Also, you said it was too close to.
Construction is gonna disturb that bluff area. You're gonna have a lot of heavy equipment up there. And you're gonna be pulling out that old basement, which is pretty close. And I just think it's gonna hurt the bluff.
Okay. George, would you like to
Sure,
expand?
I can't really expand too much on what Rick has to say because it's essentially exactly what I have in mind. The excavation, the equipment, this is a sensitive area. And then we're tripling the size of the structure, increasing the runoff, presumably tripling that, probably even more because everything's going to be paved because now the house is built all the way to the edges of the setbacks. It's too close to the bluff, and we're talking about the removal of large mature vegetation, which, is part of our master plan to kind of have and to nurture that within our community. And I'm concerned that that's going to lead to increased erosion and an unstable bluff.
Can I speak?
I mean, it's up to the chair. I think we'll just,
Let's go, Barry's.
well, Barry.
Sorry. Thank you. Okay, so we had 2 no's, and the main themes I heard there were sensitive area, roof runoff of increased size, too much disturbance during construction. Is that a fair?
So that's fair. Yeah.
Can I capture that?
So
Okay.
is there, I guess, to clarify from the denial here, the no's, what section of the code are you basing your denial on? That's the legal argument we have to be able to defend ourselves as a city. So what section of the code are you?
Couldn't tell you, to be totally honest.
Dan, would you
I mean,
like to say one more thing?
well, I know we've done the house that's, the walls done, Teresa George and Dick wall that is adjacent to the on the front and back. We tore down that existing cottage, this is probably 6 years ago. And we rebuilt there in the same format as we're doing there. We've had 0 problems there. We worked with the arborist, we worked with the city, we had to meet all of our county, and that project is a success. I guess I don't see any difference between this one and that one. And then you say you can't build in the zone, then really, what can we do?
Isn't that right up the hill from where we have this big FEMA floodway and stuff?
Yes, it is. It's right adjacent. We run the other, as that zone bluffs around, we run the other ridge of that to the south of there. No problems. The contractors that we use, Dick Holly's the builder, he's been around here for 40 years. We've been doing business for here for 35 years. We're not pulling people who haven't are built in this area, who haven't done work in this area where we're gonna shortcut anything. Are we worried about that? Absolutely. But we're gonna take all precautions we can to get to that point so we don't create any damage. When stuff happens, we're gonna do everything we can to not let it happen. So I still don't understand any viable reason other than I feel and I felt I don't know what to do with that.
Chair Mulder, I would suggest offering two things. One is to see if there's another motion in case there's other conditions that people who voted no would like to offer the applicants to see if they'd like to meet, or to tell applicant to speak with staff to see what your appeal process right is, because the vote has already been made. So I think we just need to move on with whether or not there's any other conditions that we think we could offer, and a new motion could be made for approval with additional conditions, but if there's no additional conditions, then I would suggest recommend that applicant.
A possible questions that hasn't already been provided, then we could table this and hold a follow-up meeting either at the December meeting or a special meeting at some point between that would enable them to provide that further information to help answer any questions that have not been answered to Rick and George's satisfaction.
All right, well, let's take those and see what we can do with those. Did any commissioners here, anything that the applicant could provide in addition that would allay any of those concerns?
Tree removal and landscape plan.
Let's agree.
Can I just say something? Am I allowed to say?
Yes, sure. Let's-
Am I? The protecting the bluff is a very important thing for us. And working with the arborist and working with a landscaper who knows what to plant and how to handle that is number one, something that we are planning on doing. So I don't see that damaging the bluff is going to be a problem because we're going to do everything possible not to have the bluff damaged through our landscaping initiatives. The other thing is water runoff. As Dan explained, we are going to have a collection for the runoff. So we're not going to be causing any kind of damage to the bluff from runoff. So those are the two major things that we're concerned about. And we are addressing both in a big way.
So I guess based on what Vanessa had said, perhaps.
Well, I don't know if that would
Right,
help.
perhaps
I
a
mean,
landscape plan and a water.
I could add one more thing to it too, if we wanted to have really belts and suspenders on this, is there could be a construction protection plan put in place. Where I know Dick Holly is a very good contractor, but sometimes you don't know. Sometimes, you know, if the superintendent's not there and some subcontractor shows up and they start running a bulldozer around the site, tearing things up. So if you have a construction protection plan in place where you delineate where construction can happen and barricades are put up, protection so that there can be no air or no possibility of somebody tearing the site to pieces. And that is sometimes done frequently on smaller construction sites. And sensitive ones like this one. So that's another option to go with Vanessa's suggestion.
I'm hearing essentially, I think if I can take some of these thoughts, two possible further conditions that could be added to a motion. One would be, let's say, some type of a letter from Marty Van Berlo of the building department stating that they feel that work can be done safely or that they have a proper plan in place as part of their building
Well,
permit.
they won't rule on that because that's not a requirement of the building code. Just the structural, they have very specific structural requirements which have been addressed that they're going to take care of already. I'm just saying this is just best practices. Best practice on a sensitive site is to have all the things answered up front by having a proper tree removal plan, a proper landscape plan, and also a site protection plan in place. And that the documents are part of the approval process, so maybe we need that information before, to see if this alleviates concerns.
So that could be done in one of two ways, having them bring that back to the planning commission for planning commission review. Or if the planning commission is comfortable having that be done
By staff.
administratively by staff.
Right.
The second one is they talked, and Dan, I think, mentioned some type of a collection basin for collecting water. So that it wasn't just running off the property.
Well, they could have I think a drainage plan done by Performance will address that, whether through retention, detention, or whatever process they want to use, but they have to address it, and there's lots of ways to do it. They're not expensive though, with this much coverage on the site.
So I guess, members who voted no, would your opinion change if the applicant provided a construction protection plan, a landscape plan, a tree removal plan, and a detailed drainage plan?
Yes.
I would like a guarantee of responsibility for any damage done in the future from washouts or anything like that.
I think that's implicit, isn't it? Because a landowner is responsible
It's
for
the
runoff.
law, it's the law.
It's
already
So
been-
if they affect it, they have to correct it. It's the law. We can't grade into other people's properties. Can't do it. We can't change the contour lines beyond our property lines. So if it happens, they're by law. They're responsible and they have to fix it. So that's there. But maybe there's just some, insecurities. I get it, with trees coming down. Maybe if we saw the Stefan.
I would consider changing my vote with those restrictions.
Well, I made the original motion, so I'd like to amend.
A new motion.
I'd like to make a new motion then that would contain the wording for the previous motion, as well as asking the applicant, or requiring the applicant to provide a construction protection plan, a landscape plan, tree removal plan, and a drainage plan, and provide that to the zoning administrator.
Zoning Administrator Planning Commission.
Pardon me?
For administrative
For
review.
administrative
Okay.
review, yeah. And approval.
And I will, of course, some of those things are beyond my purview, so I'm sure that I'll meet with Ben, the arborist, or,
Yeah.
or other city staff and make sure that that's appropriate and sufficient.
Is Performance considered city staff, considered city engineers? Performance engineering, are they the city's?
Benchmark.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
We use them
Sorry.
as our city engineer.
Benchmark is our city engineer. In this case, because Benchmark is our city engineer, but that's also who Dan went to for their engineer's report. In this case, we, instead of going to Benchmark to have them rubber stamp their own work, we had Beckett and Rader provide our city review of, yeah.
All right, as long as they're looking at it too, that's great.
Is that gonna be, obviously, I'm gonna have Benchmark do a drainage plan.
Yeah.
Is
Beckett and
that-
Rader will review.
Does it still have to go? Will it still go through you guys to review? it?
We'll take a look at it.
Yeah.
All right, so that's the assurance the planning commission has. We've got another set of eyes, a professional firm to review these items and make sure that they're good. All right. There's
So that's a
on the
motion
table.
by Bill. Do we have a second?
Second,
Roll call vote?
Yes.
Rick Tarczynski,
Yes,
Vanessa Warren,
Yes.
Bob Thoman.
You can't vote.
Oh, that's
Yeah.
right. I'm sorry. Thank you. George Peak,
Yes.
Bill Mulder,
Yes.
Mark Boudet,
yes.
Barry Lustgarten.
Yes.
Right, motion passes.
All right, thank you very much. All right, next thing on the agenda is public hearing for guest quarters proposed language.
How many people are gonna live in this house?
I don't think we can answer that.
Okay, answer it.
No,
It's not for us to say.
I think one.
All right. Next order of business is the guest quarters proposed language revision. And to set this one up, this is an idea that we've been batting around about letting residents lease, or I'm sorry, rent their guest quarters on a long-term basis, be more than 6 months. It would have to be more than 6 months. The thought is that this could provide some additional housing opportunities for some people. Probably a very small number of people. And two, it could provide an opportunity for residents to age in place more gracefully if they have a home that has guest quarters, where a caregiver could potentially live nearby but have their own space. And we kicked it around last time. We decided it was promising enough to warrant having some public comment, and so that's why we're here today. There are a couple downsides, but Jeff, what your?
Oh, yeah, so, and we discussed this, Nancy brought it to my attention, actually, Nancy Rondell. So there are some situations where people with their principal residence exemption, which exempts you from up to 18 mils of school operating taxes. But that only applies to the portions of your property that you occupy. And so in situations where we now are permitting somebody to take a portion of their property and allow someone else to occupy that through rental, it would make that portion of their property not eligible for the principal residence exemption. So if I had, let's say that I have a house that I live in, I have an accessory structure with guest quarters above. Right now, the use of that guest quarters is an extension of my use of my property, with my friends and family coming to visit me and stay there for as long as I say. Once we create a situation where that property is available for rent, it's no longer considered occupied by that residence owner of the main home. And that would make that portion of the property not eligible for the principal residence. They would still get a principal residence for the property. It would just be a percentage. So let's say that in my situation, 30% of the square footage of my living area for my property is the guest quarters that's rented out. I would be eligible for a 70% principal residence exemption for my property.
Oh.
Right. So it may impact somebody, the tax savings that they might have from the ability to rent out the property. I think that that's probably offset a little bit by the income that they're making from it, but that is something to be considered when reviewing potential changes to the zoning code on what we want to do and how it will affect the community.
But there's another level to this thing, and that is you don't even have to rent out your property or intend to rent out your property.
Once it's allowable, that's the way it is. So if I choose for 3 or 4 years to not rent out my property, I still can't get a principal residence on that portion of the property because I'm not able to occupy a second dwelling unit.
So just to go one level deeper.
Say that again.
Okay, so Nancy, for instance, has her house right across the street here. That is technically a duplex. There is a second apartment in there that your father-in-law lives in? Markstad.
Yeah.
So in that situation, there's a portion of that home that she does not occupy. So Mark and Nancy don't qualify for a principal residence exemption on the second dwelling unit that's on that property. And so they have a percentage exemption. It's 70.
And he doesn't pay rent, does he? He doesn't pay rent, does he?
And no,
Yeah,
and
so
even if they're not,
So,
we still wouldn't get the principal.
correct.
okay.
And
Let's say,
hold on, but why is that?
Yeah.
Well, because we're in the R2 zone, Jeff, correct me if I'm wrong, but the same thing would be with an ADU. Is if we allow people to rent them, whether they rent them or not, it doesn't matter. they will lose that portion of their homes. of their-
Because you have the ability to rent.
And
They
that's-
have the ability.
that's
As soon
something,
as you declare that you're going to
If you
make that.
change or council changes that, then across the board, correct me if I'm wrong, garage apartments, even studios that are whatever is considered habitable, which you guys will have to decide, you have to tell what that is. You will lose that, you'll lose that percentage of your principal residence exemption. So an ADU that somebody built 20 years ago, and we said you can't rent it, it's only for family and friends for 21 days or whatever, wherever we are now. Now we're gonna turn around, if that's a homestead, if it's their principal residence, say, well, now you can rent it, therefore you're gonna lose that amount of your
that
your
portion.
exemption. Just something we have to think about. It's a spin-off from that.
Yeah, we're gonna open it up in just a
Yeah.
second, Kara, so we're all
I know.
absorbing this right now. And so let me just take it to another level. So if we were to recommend this to council and council were to approve it, everybody who has something that's potentially habitable as guest quarters on their property would potentially lose some percentage of their principal residence.
It would affect some properties.
Only if they rent it out,
No,
No,
just
Even-
across the board.
Let's say that for whatever reason Nancy decides to kick her father-in-law out, right? He moves into another home somewhere, and let's say that they choose to not rent out that portion of their property. They still cannot get their principal residence on that portion.
As long as it remains a second dwelling unit, like an ADU.
If Nancy decided once they kick him out and they send him to live, next door or wherever, or up at Bill's place. If they choose to open that up so that it's not two separate dwelling units and it's one in their case, because it is all in one building, then it would be back to a single family residential home and they could expand their principal residence to 100%. Realistically, I don't think we have a tremendous number of short-term, guest quarters within the city of Harbor Springs. We've kind of estimated that in the last, since I've been here, we've added between, let's say, 12 to 14. I'm sure that there were others in existence before then. I don't think it's very many, maybe 35 or 40 would be my rough guesstimate. But also 65% of the population of Harbor Springs does not have a principal residence on them. So realistically, I think that we're talking about truly affecting properties, only about 7 to 10 properties that would see a change in their principal residence percentage.
What about the point having the guest quarters like on Traverse Street and things like that? Would that be affected?
If there's any property that has, let's say, a second home or an accessory dwelling unit or a guest quarters, that portion of that property would not qualify for principal residence exception.
And let's talk about what's habitable or what's potentially habitable. Jeff, so what if a person had a former garage on their property, for instance, that didn't have any water service or anything like that?
So that's a little different, and this is where it's probably and we're probably delving into something that's going to happen on the assessing side of things after whatever change is made. Our language for determining currently what guest quarters is I guess fairly strict. If we say it could potentially be made habitable, then that's guest quarters, right? The guidance that I have from the State Tax Commission is not so strong. So if somebody has a portion of their property, I think we had a property owner in here a couple of years ago. They wanted to have storage space above their garage because it exceeded 50% of the size of the lower floor of the garage. It automatically became guest quarters and needed approval. Even though they didn't finish anything off, I don't think they had any plans to do any plumbing or heating or anything up there. It was just storage. They required guest quarter approval. It's guest quarters. However, for assessing purposes, it's not another dwelling unit. So they would not be affected by their PRE percentage would not be affected. So it's going to take some work. If we do something here, it will take some work for me to identify all those properties, reach out to those property owners and have a discussion of how much or whether or not their principal residence exemption should or should not change. But that's really kind of a side point to this. It's something to consider as part of the equation. You know, however strongly you feel that that impacts the way that you decide to take action on this or not.
So this could affect some residents who have been happily living their lives for the last 20 years with a structure on their property. And yeah, or 40. We recommend this to council. Council decides it's a good idea. Council passes it and the ordinance changes. And then Jeff knocks on their door and says, oh, by the way, there's a new law that was just put into effect in town. And you're gonna lose 30% of your principal residence exemption.
There's something that we should bring the public in to kind of get some feedback on.
Yes.
That's what we're doing today.
The public hearing.
This is our public hearing. So why don't we pause? Would you like to pause at that point? Hear from the public.
Yes.
Yes. Right. Someone like to make a motion?
Make a motion of this to public discussion.
All right, you're up. Motion's been made and seconded to open the
Who
public
seconded
hearing.
that?
Pardon me?
Who seconded that? Thank you.
All in favor, or let's do a roll call on this, or no?
You can do it all in favor. that's
All in
fine.
favor of opening public comment, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? All right, public comment, public hearing is open. Would anyone in the public care to make a comment on this?
I guess there's a couple questions.
Introduce yourself,
I
please.
will speak for you right now, Betty, because Betty's had a guest cottage for.
Could you introduce yourself, please?
Oh, I'm sorry, Kathleen Emig. I live on 509 North Spring Street. And in speaking for Betty Davis, who lives at 321 Bluff, she has had a guest cottage for a long time, and it is a separate cottage. So I wonder if you might consider for those people, because there are a few of them in town, you might consider a grandfather clause just for existing units that have been there for a very long time, you know.
I thought it was.
Well, this is brand new, Betty. This is brand new.
Oh, my God.
So that might be an opportunity to consider just for those people, because there'll be, I think, several, like you said, maybe only 7 in the community, but anything new might go under this new document or this new.
Do you mean grandfathering in so that they would be able to keep their 100% exemption?
That is correct.
That is out of our hands. That's a state tax commission decision, and they will say no.
Well, that's a good question. A good answer. So so if you make that decision, then you're gonna have adversely affect, you know, certain people. Secondly, I guess the reason a lot of us are here, we're worried about the density and people who want to add additional structures and units onto their property for rentals. And whether they say they're long-term, we have a lot of short-term, as you know. And how is that going to be approved? How is that going to work? Are people going to be able to put second dwellings on a single piece of property? You know, is that part of your discussion here today?
Let's pause and let me answer that because it's germane. No, there was no, actually, this does not change our approval process for building a new guest quarters. Still has to go through special land use approval, still has to meet all the criteria, still has to meet, you know, the setbacks as described in the zoning. So the only thing that this thing we're considering would do is allow people to rent it for 6 months or more. So short-term rentals would not be permitted.
Yeah, I think the reason most of us came here, we're getting concerned about the density
Yeah.
and the overbuilding of town. All of us have been there a long time. So, and we just.
I had a renter when I moved in, and I'll have one when I move out, you know. I'm housing all the local workers in town.
Right.
Technically, at this point in time, rental of guest quarters is not permitted. That's a violation of the zoning code. And that has never been permitted. I know that you have guest quarters at your property and they predated when we permitted them. And then when we adopted the language allowing guest quarters, obviously you already had some. It was done as a special land use request to the planning commission. We have a number of properties within the city limits that already had them. And those would be grandfathered in, or the proper term, existing nonconformities. But we did go through a process to identify as many properties as we could at that time and inform them that they couldn't be rented.
All right. Any other comments?
Carol Leonard at 141 Spanish Street. The concern that I have, and maybe clarification, is I have what I would call a shisha. Used to be a garage at my house, and it was there at the time that I bought my house, because I now have a 2-car garage at the back of my property that also was there when I bought the house. So this other original 1-car garage is there, has no running water. No, nothing there. But my understanding from talking to people is if this passes, I could find myself, even though I have no intention of making it habitable by running plumbing in there or anything, that I could be impacted and have a percentage of my property become non-homestead, even though I live here full time and have never rented out my shisha.
Does it have a bathroom?
No,
Does
no,
it have a bedroom?
no,
Does it have a kitchen?
no.
Then how could I consider
Because
it?
it's potentially habitable.
It-
It has
it-
electricity there, because it has
Well,
electricity when I bought the house.
And this is where we get to the difference between it potentially could be considered guest quarters, but it would not be considered a habitable dwelling unit for assessing purposes. And that's where we have the separation, right? Where at some point in time, there may have been the need or the requirement where you maybe should have come to the planning commission for special land use approval to convert an accessory building into some type of a guest quarter situation that may or may not have been needed.
It's not a guest.
And if it's not even at that point, yeah, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's been converted to a point where it could be considered a second dwelling unit, where I would have to take that into consideration for assessing purposes and the principal residence exemption. Does that clarify that?
Kind of, Jeff, but when you said if it would become guest quarters, if it's potentially habitable, is the concern, because somebody, I think, would say, yeah, if you just run water in there and you put up a wall, so there's half bath or a bath, all of a sudden it's habitable, and then even though I have no intention of
That's-
renting it out.
That's the wording that we currently have in our zoning code right now, and that's the trigger for requiring somebody to come to the planning commission for special land use approval for for guest quarters. And the reason for that is the planning or the building department, and I don't really want to speak too much for them, but when they take in permits, if it's a new structure or if it's an expansion of an existing structure, enlarging it in some way, we have an agreement with them that they have to come to us and make sure that the applicant has a zoning permit in order to do that. If you're building a new house or a new garage or something, the building department says, and you need a copy of the zoning permit from Jeff saying that you have approval to do that zoning wise. If it's just remodeling an existing structure, they don't require them to provide a zoning permit from the city. So when we approve, let's say, a garage that has a second floor above it, and they promise me that it's going to be just storage space, nothing stops them from 2 years later going to the building department and saying, I want to pull a mechanical permit, an electrical permit, and a plumbing permit to convert this into a dwelling unit. The building department, I don't believe, would contact me and say, you know, they need zoning permission to do this. Because it's all interior work, they would just process that in-house. So there's no trigger to require them to come back to the planning commission. Or it's not very noticeable for us to be able to find that and notify them and say you're in violation of the zoning code. So to skip all of that, where it's me trying to find these situations, we just said the triggering factor is going to be when you build that building. If you're creating an area that could be potentially be made habitable, mainly and realistically, what we normally are talking about is a garage that has a second floor, and where that second floor has a ceiling height in some areas of at least 7 foot 6 inches, and the area above is at least 50% or greater of the floor below. That's where we say you could go to the building department and have this converted into living area. So before we worry about whether or not you will or won't do that, we're just going to require that you get special land use approval for guest quarters right away, in case you choose to do that.
But how, with the existing accessory buildings. How are you, to the point that somebody asked, if you never had rented it out before and you have no intention of it, but it's habitable, will they get dinged on the non-homestead issue?
We're gonna have to go through and do an inventory to make that determination. There may be properties where it's sufficient enough to be considered a second dwelling unit. Excuse me. That there might have to be that conversation where I inform somebody, I'm sorry to let you know, but this is a second dwelling unit, and because it's now available to be rented, you cannot get credit for the principal residence exemption for that portion of your property,
And I would
Even though
say,
they never rented.
even though they've never rented.
I would say just to add to that, it's very hard for us, for Jeff to just say one blanket statement that yes, your accessory unit will be, each individual accessory unit will need to be investigated and assessed for that. So it's really hard here to say yes or no.
It's going to require some work, some investment of time to research and find out how it's going to affect all properties.
The other,
Go ahead, no,
can I-
go ahead.
just one other comment, and I think I made it when we were first talking about guest quarters potential for long-term rentals, is, as I understand it, the accessory buildings too have closer setbacks. So for instance, if you're in a R1, which I think I'm in, my setback for my primary residence is 8 feet. It's 5 feet for an accessory building. So I'm wondering, to me, that's kind of backwards. That your rental, if you choose to rent one of your buildings, that rental can actually be closer to your neighbor than your primary residence. Is that accurate or?
It's a good concern, and that sounds like the setbacks for the R1C zoning district, and I think that is where your property is located. Principal buildings are 7 feet or 8 feet from the side yard setback.
And I think the accessory is 5.
Accessory is 5. The other big difference is for the principal building, which is typically the larger building. The rear yard setback in R1C, I believe, is 30 feet. But the rear yard setback for an accessory structure is only 5 again. And that is of when we've had special land use requests for accessory buildings that are going to be 2 stories and have guest quarters. That is sometimes one of the concerns that neighbors have, is that close proximity. And I think there was the one that we did on 3rd Street, I think for Gordon Andrews. And there was a concern from the neighbor of how close it was going to be. There's going to be a 2-story building 5 feet from my property line. I think the neighbor had some type of a courtyard where they entertained. And in that situation, there was a condition made that he had to move it to be 8 feet away, which is where a principal building could be.
And remove some windows, I think.
And I think, yes, that might be true, yeah. So, and that's something that if we feel that that's a concern, we could add to this that especially, that could be addressed in some way to increase. the setbacks.
Just for the sake of efficiency, I think we should see if there's any other public
Yeah,
comment. and
that's
then
what I
go back to
think. I think there was one.
I just have 2 concerns. One is there's a lot of subjectivity in this. I mean, the more people talk of, well, maybe it will be, maybe it won't be. What will it depend on what it won't? And also, I also feel like it's kind of dinging the year-round residents. Because they're the ones with the principal residence exemptions. And they're the ones that are gonna lose part of that if they have an accessory or a garage apartment or a art studio, or there are a number of them in town that are principal residences that have another habitable portion. So depending on how you end up defining that. I think there's a lot of unanswered questions about it. It makes me a little nervous.
Okay, any other public comment? All right, we have a motion.
One more.
I've got one, I didn't even think I had one, but all of a sudden, I'm gonna be building a garage, turned down garage, building a 2nd story. I was gonna put a bathroom, extra bedroom above my garage, which is attached to my house. Does that turn out to be? I just don't know. Is that a problem I've got to look at then?
I think I'd need to see more of your site plan to make, because when you talk about a garage that's attached to your home.
Got a garage attached, which is coming down attaching a new one right to the house, putting a second story on the half a second story, and entering from the house into the garage above the base case for storage, but I want to put a bathroom and everything up there.
This, depending, again, without seeing your site plan and how everything is connected and whatnot, it's difficult to really be able to determine whether or not that would be considered an attached or detached garage to determine how we would treat all of that. So that's a further discussion that we would need to have.
So I'll do that when I do my permit.
When, yeah, before that, you'll need to get zoning approval for that change and whatnot, and we'll have to have that discussion of whether it would be considered an accessory structure or as part of the principal building. There's a lot that gets into that would take up a lot of time here. But feel free to get in touch with me and we can have a discussion on that.
Any other public comment?
Think about that.
Great. Do we have a motion to close the public hearing?
Make a motion to close the public hearing.
Is there a second?
Second that.
Second from George, I heard. All right, all in favor of closing the public hearing, please say aye. Aye. All opposed? Public hearing is closed. It's back to the commission now. And so the idea of this thing was to possibly provide some new housing opportunities. We always thought it would be for a very small number of people. We didn't even know if anyone would actually be helped by this thing. And then, but we thought it was a promising idea. And then now we've learned about some unintended consequences and some questions and some, subjectivity that would be required. And so what do you think at this point? Oh, wait, I'm sorry. And we need to talk about the fact that I have guest quarters on my property. We talked about this last time and we decided that you believe that could be objective and could participate and vote. And you still feel that way, or does anyone have any concerns about my participation on the topic?
No concern.
I'll make a motion that we allow Bill to participate and vote on this topic.
Oh, I'll second that.
Do we include you, Mark, or you only have short-term rental and?
Yeah,
commercial?
I'm in the B1 district and it's a short-term rental.
Okay.
It doesn't affect me, but thanks. I forgot about that.
Jeff, do you want to call a vote or?
Mark Boudet made a motion. Do we have a second?
I seconded it.
Vanessa seconded.
I think all in favor.
Yeah, okay. Jeff, you want to just call that all in favor? Just
All in favor?
say what?
Hey,
Say yay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yay.
Any opposed? Say nay. Pass.
So, all right, so back to the topic. Barry, how do you feel about this thing at this point?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, there's a big need to have these dwellings, I think it brings a lot of good, but this new news definitely opens up a can of worms that, is a problem. And I do agree with Nancy as far as stating that it does ding the year-round residents, which there's not many of them, and we kind of value that. So this is very tough, so.
George?
I think, it's great that somebody realized this was an unintended consequence and brought it to light. Because it clearly isn't what in line with certainly what I feel like we should be accomplishing. So I think this is all in the right direction. However, we can't penalize year-round residents, especially people who have guest quarters and dwelling units that maybe they don't even use, and suddenly, their city tax bill is going to increase. That doesn't seem very fair. So I think that we should look at a workaround if there are any, or it seems like we have some pretty clever and astute people paying attention to this.
Where to come down on this?
It's unfortunate about the tax thing and really don't want to penalize people for having something on their property. And first thing that comes to my mind is could we set it up somehow with a special use so that people that wanted to do it could come forth and get a special use, and then they could run it out for 6 months minimum and not have to worry about everybody else getting taxed.
So that's the workaround like George was mentioning. Potentially. Bob, what do you?
I agree with these two gentlemen, to just use a broad brush is just putting too many people in harm's way, or could. I know it's difficult to do this on a case-by-case basis, but then again, if there are only 8 or 9, maybe we could do it on a case-by-case basis, or.
Judge says the state won't let us.
Oh, right, okay, yeah.
If we wanted to. Mark, what do you think?
I think I'm in agreement. I think though that there'd be a way that we could get something to work around, you know, where someone would have to come in, create a special category for that. Because there's another side to the coin, and is that the people who do benefit from this, that who choose to do this actively, you know, they get income, which will probably strongly offset, tax increases. It's a business decision. And so if we can frame it in that manner, then we can have something that can happen. I still support this. I think, we do need additional housing in our town. So I'd really like to focus on finding a legal workaround. I suspect there's some way of doing this. Maybe that's a completely different meeting, and might bring maybe a little bit of additional help to figure it out, because I'm still a strong support of this. The only thing I want to say, when you say not less than 6 months, is that 6 consecutive months or 6 months out of the year? On what's written right now, that's the only thing I picked up on it, so sort out before I forget.
And that's maybe something that we should clarify, because I think the intent, not to put words in your mouth, was concurrent months. Or consecutive, because the idea was to avoid and make sure that this was long-term use and not available for short-term use.
Okay, so
And maybe minimum stay 6 months.
well, just
something.
no, just
Or just
add the
say
word consecutive in
consecutive.
front of 6.
6 consecutive. Vanessa.
Everything
But
that's been said.
yeah, I want to support this strongly. I don't want this to drop by the wayside. But I think we do have to honor this, obviously.
A potential way, and it might drag this out. I know originally we started talking about this, and then we got onto the topic of changing language and getting into accessory dwelling units. And then we said, let's try and make something happen a little sooner. And we came back to this method.
Yeah.
But that could potentially be a way to distinguish between guest quarters that are available solely for overflow of guests that are visiting your property and socializing with you, and it's not a rental property that's available for rent or to be used long-term, versus an accessory dwelling unit and the special land use or whatever process we create for that approval.
So the person will come in and declare if they want to take
Right.
what they have as an ADU, and that triggers
Right,
the
'cause
percentage.
Guest quarters could be situations where there isn't even any plumbing or kitchenette or bathroom there. It's just maybe bedrooms or storage. Versus an accessory dwelling unit, which I think is
Do
more.
we even have that? Then why do we have guest quarters? It's part of a house. I know back in the day, I know that got put in because we were like putting our fist down on stuff back then. But why is it even in there? It seems like, why is it even there?
Oh, we are coming to our zoning code review,
Yeah.
section by section, we'll eventually.
And if we want to modify that, but I wasn't here at the time, so I'm making a big assumption, and that might not be appropriate to do, but I think it was twofold. One, normally accessory dwelling units, normally accessory structures are one-story structures. Somebody wants to build a 24 by 24 garage and it doesn't have a second floor on it. Whereas guest quarters, typically what we see with carriage houses is it's a garage with a second floor. So you now have a much taller building in closer proximity to a property line, which was brought up, thus necessitating coming in for special land use approval.
Also, maybe there's 2 levels of guest quarters, though. There's the attached guest quarters, which is maybe just really just a house, and then there's a detached guest quarters, which is an accessory building, which is what I think we're talking more about. Because there's two different types of these things, I think, by what I'm hearing here.
The way that our zoning code is currently written, guest quarters are permitted in accessory buildings only. And accessory buildings are detached structures. So right now, by the code, let's look at single family residential neighborhoods like R1, like up in Layton Park around the IGA or Lake Street, for instance. Those areas, you cannot do a duplex, which would be an accessory dwelling unit within the primary building. That would be 2 dwelling units in one
Okay.
building. That would be a duplex. We don't permit those in those zones. As opposed, accessory dwelling units or accessory buildings with guest quarters in them. Right now, because they're not available for rent, we don't consider them a second dwelling unit. And we permit them through special land use approval. And we do that because of the added structure size and the heightened activity of use while guests are visiting you. Is that?
Yeah. If I like it or not. I know why it's there.
That's the way our code is at this time.
Yeah, I'm just trying to
But we have
simplify.
a chance to do anything. going
Yeah, I mean, you could have different classifications. You could have guest housing, which families use for family and friends. You're talking about ADUs, which are short-term rentals that primarily because you're a resort community. You could have a long-term rental classification called something like supplemental housing, which you use for like workforce housing or renting it out to somebody in town. And maybe the third one, the long-term rental or whatever you want to call it, is the trigger that gets into the PRE, the principal. So the property owner declares, you know, what they're using. I mean, if they're using it as a guest house today, they're and if you had something in the ordinance called supplemental housing, where somebody could rent their ADU for 6 months or longer, then they would make the declaration and then they would have to pay the extra 18 mils on that.
So we could actually set it up so that the property owners make their own declaration, their own decision. And if they don't, then they don't get penalized. Correct?
Well, they make the declaration how they're gonna use the property, like Bill was thinking of using his guest house, I'm assuming, Bill, to rent out. And you know that a lot of the employers here don't have housing for their staff. So maybe somebody wants to rent their house out from like May until September. Well, then they would make a declaration that they're gonna use that accessory building for long-term rent. And because they're doing that, then they'd have to pay the extra tax on it. But like you said, they're also getting the additional revenue on the rental. But I think we could structure it where you have different classifications.
Right.
And then the property owners decide what, and it's a business decision on how they want to do it.
Right, yeah. So if we have that available, then let's pursue that, I suggest.
Yeah.
To me, that makes sense. Many things in our current zoning code are really complex. And we're working towards.
Basically, what we're saying is if Bill wants to rent out his garage.
I don't.
He does.
Okay.
We want a piece of the action. That's what it's all about.
Schools do. Yeah. All right, so what I'm
Do we
hearing,
need a piece of the action? Do we need to go through all this to get a piece of the action from 8 people?
yeah, what I'm hearing is that, you know,
Well, it's not us,
Members-
remember, Bob, it's a school district.
Yeah,
not us.
this is
We're
not money
paying
that would come
anything.
to the city of Harbor Springs.
what I'm hearing is that members, planning commission members are generally in support of trying to find a way to have long-term rentals in ADUs or guest quarters or something. But we're concerned about unintended consequences and about administration and about judgment. And that there may be a better, more surgical way to do this when we look at the whole zoning code. Is that a fair?
Yeah.
Based on that, I would say we don't bring this to a vote. We don't have a motion. We just let it hang and see if there's a better solution.
Can we provide directions?
I think,
Yes.
I've got directions.
Okay, good.
Based on what I'm hearing.
Please go ahead.
All right. Everybody's good with not making a motion, not voting, that you just table it, let it lie for right now. Okay, great. All right, moving on to the next topic. Victor needs our input on the capital.
You guys ready to go for it?
Yeah,
All right. I will
we can do it.
really quickly.
But while we're talking about agenda, at this point, I would like to say that I would recommend we do not go over the zoning code proposal tonight, and that we have a special meeting.
Oh, man, I yellow lined it and everything.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah.
I'll do the capital improvements plan.
We can. Let's do Victor's thing and then let's figure out
All
our.
right, so the capital improvements plan, this is the draft 2023 to 2028 capital improvements plan. You've had the copy out for 2 weeks to review it. I'll just go through a very quick presentation, so you know what it is about. So a CIP is a 6-year plan for capital projects or purchases over $10,000. It includes necessary projects and desirable projects. Approval does not commit the city to spending any of the money in the capital improvements plan or doing those that specific year. The reason why it comes to the planning commission is because it's a requirement of the Michigan Planning Enabling Act, which requires that the planning commission looks at the projects and purchases in the capital improvements plan, basically to see does it mesh with the overall plan of the city, does it meet, the master plan goals, et cetera. So this must be approved by the planning commission and the city council. The benefit to the city is that it allows us to plan for future projects. It gives us a better understanding of the timeline for projects. So the process basically very quickly there, September, department heads submit project sheets to the city manager. October, I compile those sheets and that information, distribute to the policy team, which our policy team is a mix of staff and board members. It includes myself, city clerk Nick Whitaker, DPW director Lucas Banerjee, then the mayor, and then the planning commission chair. So what we do is we rate and score those projects based on a bunch of different criteria, which were listed in the CIP. November, I take it here to the planning commission, and then in December, it goes to council for approval along with the budget. This year, we have 71 projects and projects or purchases of goods that are over $10,000. Total cost is about $19 million. And this is over the course of 6 years. The average cost per project is about $270,000. And we are at least going to seek grants or donations for at least 9 of those projects. Electric fund projects, this is the big one, constitutes about 2/3 of the overall spending. So about $12 million. Just a reminder, again, the CIP does not take into consideration small purchases, such as, for example, we need to buy a new desk or we need to paint a building that's only going to cost a couple $1,000s. Some basic stats. This is how the projects are distributed between the different funds. So it gives you an idea of like where the projects are at. You have the general fund, water, sewer, streets, electric equipment, waterfront, and DDA. As you see, the bulk of them, 30 of them are with the electric. Again, as I said earlier, $12 million from the electric fund. That's how many projects we have going on in the electric department right now. Some of the lower projects or waterfront DDA funds don't really have as much projects or as much money going on need to be spent there. Over the course of the next 6 years, 2024 is intended to be our big spend year with the electric fund. That's when we intend for the substation and other electric projects to go forward. 2025 also is a big year, but then 2026 and 2027 kind of peters out there. And even 2023 is under $2 million. So we don't expect to have big spends those years. Really quickly, I took the goals of the master plan and showed which projects go under which goal. So goal 1 was talked about the distinctive natural character defined by bluffs, clean air, native plants. Well, that's repairing the Judd Hill wall is one that kind of helps preserve the bluff. And the North FEMA project, there's a floodplain that we have kind of by the DPW building on property that's shared between IBS, the city, and I think the school district that FEMA identified as a potential project or a potential flood issue that we need to address. So that again goes in preserving, balancing our nature, preserving our nature. Harbor Springs will be a vibrant community with amazing vistas. 2 of those things, the Main Street streetscape project, again, helps preserve some vistas and keep an attractive streetscape. So does burying our underground electric lines. Goal 4, the recreation facilities will be conveniently located, exceptionally maintained, safe and attractive. You see all those projects: boardwalk replacement, Ford Park building windows, Kiwanis Park upgrades, Cassequat playground equipment upgrade, and skate parks windows replacement. Goal 5 says the residents and visitors will enjoy a unique collection of recreation opportunities. We have the bike path, boardwalk replacement, Kiwanis Park, Cassequat observation deck at Tourist Park, and tennis courts. So you'll see many of these come under multiple goals. They don't just come under one goal. Harbor Springs will be comprised of a viable community-oriented establishments that foster and recognize the city's resort and recreation team, while city amphitheater is on there, as well as upgrades to Kiwanis Park. Residents and visitors will enjoy a vibrant waterfront area, Ford Park parking that goes into ensuring there's easy access, and west dock pedestals, which are the lights that are on the docks that help light up the docks for boaters that visit and pedestrians, and allow them to plug in. Goal 10, harbor development will strive to maintain open views and support a sustainable level of human use. So that goal is a balance, right, of preserving views while also sustaining human use. We have the harbor master building renovation and the west dock pedestals. Goal 11 is about complete streets, making our streets safe, efficient, aesthetically attractive. We have a lot of different projects there: the bike path, the boardwalk replacement, Judd Hill Wall, the Main Street Streetscape Project, Merchants Walkway Corridor, sidewalk replacement, and purchasing a street sweeper. Well, replacing our street sweeper. We're updating them, sorry. Goal 12, networks and trails, again, Little Traverse Wheelway, bike path, and boardwalk replacement. Goal 13 is about providing public services so that the services we provide will be efficient, productive, and strategic. We have on here police department computer replacements. The police department is replacing all their computers at once. We're trying to get on they haven't been on a yearly kind of a rotation. So we're gonna try to get to a rotation so we're not replacing all our computers at once to have such a capital improvement spend. We do that at City Hall. We'll get the police department on that hopefully soon as well. But de-digitization, which is all our deeds and our maps and stuff that are on paper that we need, when we need to search for a deed, it's not on our records here. So we need to go search in our boxes, and to digitize all those will make things a lot easier. Buying a loader, plow trucks will, of course, improve public service, police vehicles, SCADA system, uniforms, zoning administrator software. And finally, I'm not going to list them all out, but goal 14, those are essentially all our electric and water projects that fit under utility services in Harbor Springs will provide clean water, power, fuel, and communication linkages. And then goal 15 is working with our regional entities and state entities. We have an MDOT Pleasant View traffic light project. MDOT is redoing the intersection on M119 and Pleasant View. They need us to move our electric lines so they can create a better intersection there. So we're working with them to do that. So those are, that's essentially all the goals, how they interline. This will go to basically council. I mean, planning commission is approving to make sure that these projects are basically in line with what the master plan envisions overall. And again, this does not commit the city to doing those projects. The city council will review all these projects during the budgets for 2023, and that's when they will commit themselves to budgeting for those projects. Again, this is just a plan, an overview of where we want to go, but these projects may fall out. For example, one thing that fell out of this CIP from previous year was a dog park. You know, that was on there and now it's not. And there's reasons for that, but that's just an example of how these things aren't guaranteed to happen just because they are in the CIP.
And what do you need from the planning?
It needs approval to go, it just needs planning commission approval. And then it'll go to council for council.
Yeah, I have a question.
Yeah.
Does the city ever look at backing away from the electric situation and allowing public utilities to come in and take care of all of
You mean private?
I'm sorry?
You mean private or co-ops?
Yeah.
Not seriously. It's the problem is we just did a study, actually our MPPA, our public power agency just did a study. We provide, our electric rates are 50% lower than Great Lakes Energy. So our customers will see their bills double. But so
that being said, that the reason for that is that Great Lakes Energy has these things in their bill structure.
Yeah.
We don't. So our electricity is cheaper. However, when we add $12 million to the price of our electricity, we may not be cheaper than that.
Well, we've already did a rate study that has incorporated rate plan increase and has already incorporated this projected increase in spending. And so people aren't going to be seeing a major increase. I think it was 3% over 5 years on average. So we'll still be well
So you believe it's
competitive.
well worth our while.
And it's also to remember, that all these projects for the electric department are paid for from revenue from the electric, so no taxpayer money goes toward this. And actually, historically, the city has been getting several $100,000 per year from the electric fund to prop up our tax paid projects. So is it worth it from our perspective, having to manage the whole system? Sure, but I think the customer will feel a lot more pain if it goes to a co-op, because it'll be.
And there's a lot to be said for having control over your power and not being at the whim of someone else.
Yeah, for example, public utilities won't bury the lines.
Right?
Yeah, the co-ops won't.
No way, not at what the cost is.
Yeah, and I think another thing to keep in mind here is that our workers and electric department, they're local, right? They live in the area. Whereas when you go to like a Great Lakes, they won't necessarily be local. They could be coming, if it's an emergency, they could be coming from 2 hours away. So there's a lot of benefits to it.
Huge benefit.
But I get your question, is it worth it financially? I say, yes, it is based on our studies.
Good question.
When you're doing your budget forecasting for 6 years ahead of time, are you including inflation with those?
We try to, I know Kyle does, Chief Neat with his police vehicles, he always, this year, you can't always predict inflation, but we do, we try to. Some costs are just unknown. I mean, some will go down even, and but yeah, that's a good point.
So like with this whole electrical thing, what if at some stage in the next 2 to 3 years, there's some great, green energy co-op that comes to the city, hey, $4.5 million, and you can have all of these solar panels or whatever it is next to your substation, or it doesn't need to be near your substation anymore. This would be a great avenue for your community to pursue. How would something like that fit in with this?
So I guess it depends on the relationship between the city and whatever entity that's going to come and do that. We have our own solar programs, at the city where we try to encourage people to put solar on so we could reduce that load. But if there was an entity like that were to come to say, we have this project, I mean, that this is what we think we might need to do in the future.
Understood.
And what we might want to do in the future. And it's not only is it called for in the state planning law, but I think it's just good practice to know where you might be going. And, council changes, planning commission people change, staff changes, so that goalpost can switch, needs change, so that vision of where we go could always change based on needs and based on desires of community. But right now, this is where we're thinking where we need to go or want to go. So
I think it's also important to know, we're forecasting out 5-6 years here, but we review this every year.
yes.
So, if like he mentioned, last year when we reviewed this, we had a dog park on the list for at some point in time, and that's changed. So if something changes and some new project comes on, you would see that in next year's capital improvements plan for review and discussion.
So you're looking for our concurrence that the projects that are in here are generally in support of our master plan?
Yes.
Generally.
So basically, and I know I've included it, we've included it in your packet, right? The state language right here, and I won't read it all out, but it's right, this italicized part, and basically it says, the capital improvements plan shall be based upon the requirements of the local unit of government for all types of public structures and improvements. And then right here, showing the planning commission, basically that they give it to you after adoption of master plan shall annually prepare a capital improvements plan of public structures improvements. So you're basically just preparing this, we're preparing this plan, this is, right here, capital improvements plan show that those public structures improvements that in the commission's judgment will be needed or desirable and can be undertaken within the 6-year period.
All right. So really, there would be a motion to recommend approval of this plan to the
Well, no,
city council.
they would approve it and then it go, then it also has to go to council for approval, by the legislative body.
All right. So realistically, we don't know all the details of all these projects, so we have to count on Victor and Jeff and the staff. You know, that they've come up with projects that make sense, we've got realistic cost estimates.
And I would add to it that I think this is a really wonderful tool. That in the not so recent past, we never got this information. So this is really, I think, quite wonderful and shows the competency of our staff.
Well, I appreciate that. And I think
Seriously, this is good.
we did give this to you 2 weeks ahead of time. As I know last year what happened was, there's a concern, but we only had a few days to review it. So even in the future, if you have a question about any of these projects, I put in the sake of keeping this a 15-page document, we don't have lengthy explanations. So we have, one short description. So in the future, if you want to just ask us any questions about the projects, please go ahead.
I do want to ask a question.
Okay.
Kyle, tell me about digitized graphic.
Oh, the chalk.
Now, you're not allowed to use a chalk stick anymore?
Correct, we can't use a chalk stick anymore.
Says who?
Does the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals out of Cincinnati.
Because
It's an invasion of privacy.
to put a chalk mark.
It's
on it.
considered an illegal search.
Legal
correct?
search.
Legal search. I put it, it has been back and forth and back and forth. I mean, this is like, when I first started up here, we could chalk for like the first 2 years, maybe 3 years, then you could chalk for a year. Then it went to the Court of Appeals, they overturned it, but now it's to basically the final that it's illegal. It isn't, I don't think it's gonna change. It actually,
Yeah, it won't. It
What's that?
probably won't. It's
it
really
won't
hard.
change. It
If it
actually,
does, it's gonna be several years.
yeah, there's some, I think it's Bay City or Saginaw, I think maybe Saginaw is where it's done from. That they sued the city of Saginaw for doing that, and they were actually looking for back payment on all the parking tickets that they issued. So, yeah, so this system will allow us, because basically, right now, what we do is we take pictures with our phones. And we go back, you take a picture of the license plate, you take a picture of the hubcap. You see where that center emblem is, and we go back and we review it 3.5 hours or 4.5 hours later.
And that's not an invasion of privacy.
No, you can take a picture.
And there's new software out that'll help.
There's a software where you can actually put where the valve stem is, and it will log it in, and it's
We need that for the Benbury Sound.
especially with somebody my age where I gotta wear readers. It's like.
All right.
Thank you.
Sorry.
So do you need a motion?
Yeah, we need a motion.
To approve.
Yep.
Motion to approve the capital. All right.
I move to approve.
Second.
All right, we've got a motion to approve in a second. I'm gonna call a vote, Jeff.
No, but I will anyway.
All right.
No, just yes, of course. Let's start with Barry Lustgard,
Yes.
Mark Bidet,
Yes.
Bill Mulder,
Yes.
George Pete,
Yes.
Bob Thoman,
Yes.
Vanessa Warren,
Yes.
Rick Tarczynski.
Yes.
Motion
Great,
passes.
thank you.
I did notice,
Thank you.
Victor, there's
Thank you.
nothing in there.
Good job.
planning.
Yes, there is.
Zoning administration.
So right now, we don't have any software for planning and zoning, right? I have software for assessing. And there's a spot in there where we can put some limited information, but there's really not a lot of, detail or anything that
I
you
was
can do.
thinking more like dinner.
Dinner? So,
These meetings are getting long. We need to start bringing things in.
the same company that I have my assessing software through, they have, and it kind of ties in with their building department software. But they have software for maintaining and tracking, not just zoning permits, but also zoning violations and other things. And the benefit of that, I think, don't hold me to this, but I believe that there's even a portion of the software where, let's say, for whatever reason, Vanessa is driving through town, she sees a zoning violation. So she can email me or use this software on our website to say, I think there's an issue with this property and you need to go check it out. That provides me a notification that there's an issue.
Vigilante.
And then the follow-up is I then can go into that software and say, yep, I visited the site. It's not a problem, or it is a problem or whatnot. But then I believe that Vanessa can go back onto the website and track the progress of that potential issue. And see whether it's been resolved, whether it's an ongoing issue, or what the status of it is. It also provides me the ability to provide better input to you in the number of zoning permits we have. That, you know, right now, when I do that, I give you the planning and zoning report. That's me in April counting all my paper copies and going through and, you know, keeping track of all of that. And this will then, I'm hoping, be able to give me a report that says we had this many fence permits, this many whatevers, and go through and more easily provide you with better information with maybe more detail. So we'll see, but
I hope council.
yeah.
For us.
I
do. All right.
Talk about,
Yeah, we need to talk about our, and our approach. So here we are again at the end of another long meeting, and we have yet to really get to the zoning code. And Jeff had kind of called the question on whether or not it's time to schedule some special meetings to just attack the zoning code with a clear head and give it the attention it deserves. How do people feel about that?
Yes.
Yes.
Agreed.
All right.
Would it be possible though in some of these extra meetings to not have to actually be sitting in the room? Can we call it? Since they're just code review, we're not dealing with public cases. Is that possible? Because I'm gonna be gone some this winter. I don't want to miss these meetings.
I understand. So right now, as it stands, you can participate in a meeting. You can participate in discussion via Zoom or some other means. But the state says that you do not count towards a quorum.
Thank you, Carol.
And that you do not count, you cannot vote. Okay. So, I don't know what we can do. So depending on how many people would prefer to do it that way, the other option might be that we could maybe do this as some type of a committee of a subset of the planning commission members. And that the committee could review and provide their input and updates and changes, and then report back to the planning commission as a whole. And thus changing the section E here, zoning code review of articles 2 and 3. I mean, there's a number of pages here.
Yeah.
We could probably spend an hour or so discussing that. Maybe we could do that as a subcommittee and then bring that back.
And then bring it back.
And have it be a 15-minute report of here's what we found and here's what we changed to the planning commission, if as another potential option.
I just wonder. Imagine everybody wants to be part of this, right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
so we'd have a pretty,
If everybody wants to be part of it, then it would be a meeting.
yeah.
Because once we hit 5, we have a quorum and we have.
Yeah, so,
Yeah.
yeah, subcommittee, you have to be less.
So the only issue would be, let's say that we were holding our special meeting and you wanted to choose to participate via Zoom, you could. We just wouldn't be able to toggle you here as in roll call, and we wouldn't be able to call your name for a vote with the current things.
I wouldn't be voting on anything till some other meeting.
We probably wouldn't be voting,
Just discussion.
We've got a lot of discussion and learning.
Yeah, because there's a lot of really, good, you know, there's a lot of really good stuff here, but it's also have to be discussed.
Yeah. So. When we were doing the master plan, we had special meeting, work session meetings every 2 weeks, kind of on and off. 2 weeks from the regular planning commission meetings. Same night, same time. So the first one of those that comes up is December 1st. How does that look for people? Would you like to take our first crack at the zoning code?
At night,
December 1st.
5:30, right?
Well, that's what Bob's asking. Should
Oh.
we could do it earlier, you know.
These things can run for hours.
Yeah, I know.
I mean, here we are, it's 8:00.
Well,
But I work.
Yeah, my goal would be not to have it run for hours like.
Maybe we can go early. When is as soon as everybody could be here, start earlier if we can.
I can be here at 5,
I might be able to be here by 5 too. I got work also, but.
but I,
Well, let's, for this next one, let's do 5:30. Let's keep the same time. So we know we can get everybody in. You know, we're starting to get into it. Then we can decide if we want to modify the time and do that. So what would you think about December 1st, 5:30
I can do it.
I can cap it, at 7 p.m.
That's even,
Yeah, nice. ZBA is a first class operation.
Did you hear that, Jeff?
I did, yeah. You're gonna bring the pizza?
I thought maybe the city would, we just gave you $32 million. What? A couple of pizzas.
All right, well then, we'll have our next meeting.
Sure, so we'll postpone,
5:30,
John, do you think we need a motion for that?
change the agenda to set a meeting.
Just
or-
set a special meeting?
Yeah, I would.
Table?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So you want a
I'd
motion
like
to,
I'll make that motion to schedule a special meeting of the planning commission on December 1st at 5:30. And the only item on the agenda, or we'll try to keep it that way, is to review the zoning code that we've seen twice now in our agenda that we haven't gotten to. Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, say nay. Right. Great. Are there any member comments now? Other topics? All right, then this meeting is adjourned, and thank you so much for coming out tonight.
Have a wonderful Thanksgiving.
Good work. Hard work.
yeah. Hope you didn't mind me calling on there, Nancy.
Jeff, could you stop recording?
It's a good example.
Hold on. Yeah, we're taking one.
Okay.
Interesting.
Is he a good